Welcome to the Centre for Legal Leadership and to Financial CrimeCast. I'm Sam Tate, Head of White Collar Crime and Compliance at the law firm RPC. And in this series, we will have the pleasure of speaking with leaders in the field of financial crime, compliance and ethics to discuss their experiences, what they've learnt along the way, and what financial crime issues they see on the horizon. In this episode, I'm joined by Sue Scott, a former global head of anti-bribery and corruption at HSBC. Sue's extensive experience in the financial services industry has spanned financial crime risk management, policy development, global training, risks of all types as they rise in anti-bribery and money laundering and customer due diligence. Sue, thank you very much for joining us on the Financial CrimeCast.
Oh, thank you, Sam. It's really lovely of you to ask me to do this and look back on my career, actually, given I'm, as you know, pivoting. So thank you.
Great. Well, I thought we might get started with this question, which was just if you could tell us about your journey, your kind of career in financial crime, and in particular, how you got into the field.
So I started out, my first role in financial services was I was the team secretary on a project finance team at Standard Bank. And it was a very small organisation back then, so a few hundred people. And our team happened to be sat right next to the compliance department. And the head of compliance acted as a bit of a mentor for me because I was doing a law degree at night school. So I had a bit of a full-on agenda. And he had a role come up in his department as a compliance analyst. So we doubled the size of his compliance department when I joined. So the two of us and a few hundred staff. And it was fantastic because it was one of those things where, you know, in a small organisation, you get to know everybody. It was I was doing everything from SFA, as it was then, registrations, to looking at London Metal Exchange rules, helping with corporate finance, compliance issues and conflicts of interest. So a fantastic start. And I finished my law degree, but I realised I didn't want to pursue a career in law because I absolutely loved compliance. From there, I moved on to Royal Bank of Scotland, so much bigger organisation, and I was doing treasury compliance. And then a role came up a couple of years into that at HSBC, and they were looking for somebody to go into their newly formed international compliance department. So it involved a bit of travel, which I was very interested in doing. And the role was a bit of a sort of audit kind of for compliance functions, but because I think back then in the early 2000s, HSBC was a bit of a federation of banks with Midland and CCF and Republic all quite relatively new into the fold, and everybody was slightly doing their own thing. So I think that's where, for me, the love of looking at things and understanding the framework and putting in place good practices started. And sort of followed me through my career. And as part of that role, we looked at new regulations. So I got involved in things like the Market Abuse Directive implementation, MiFID. I helped then started focusing on the private bank and helped them with their cross-border marketing guidelines. I worked on projects like we looked at aggregating substantial shareholdings, so there was a program of work to do that. Looked at their first reporting system, so lots of different things because I like to just get stuck in. And dare I say, I was a bit of a know-it-all, so I like to learn new things. And that role was starting to get, I was starting to do more policy sort of stuff. And it just so happened I was sat next to the private bank operations team, the sort of the head office part of the private bank, our department. And they had a role come up in operational risk. And they had a big project going on in operational risk that was when 3 lines of defence became a thing. So I started to work in operational risk and helping them do a complete revamp of their risk and control assessments. And that was part of a big group project, but I was focusing in on the private bank side. And I think as I was moving through, I was starting to find I was taking on more leadership roles, so becoming less of an SME and stepping into leadership. And that was quite a challenge for me. So that's where the coaching first came in. I found that I was a bit of a micromanager of note, is probably the way I would describe myself initially. So I went for some coaching, and that has been a bit of a love affair for me, to be quite honest. The difference it made in how I worked with people, I utterly changed the way that I managed and led. And then operational risk is a very interesting area, but very analytical and lots of reporting and data. And that wasn't really my thing. I'm very much more of a big picture, strategic kind of thinker. And what came up then was an enormous fine for money laundering offences for HSBC. And there was a really fantastic lady who had been asked to come in and help the private bank set up their global standards program. So that was part of the HSBC response to the deferred prosecution agreement that we were under. And she asked me if I would do the customer due diligence lead role for that. And I think that was kind of like where everything sort of came together, because I was working with private bank offices all over the world. I was working closely with the transformation team. I was doing all the policy work. There was training. We were working with group. It was just the most amazing project. So it came up for perhaps all the wrong reasons, but I think the benefit for HSBC in that program was actually, for the first time, all lines of business, the globe kind of came together as an organisation to say, right, how are we going to solve this? It was really quite an inspiring program to be on. And then as the private bank came out of that program, that role kind of mutated into more policy and training and looking after all of the instruction manuals in the private bank. And I was just starting to get itchy feet again. The then head of compliance for private bank was also head of anti-bribery and corruption, and a role came up in his team to help with the anti-bribery and corruption transformation for the group. So I jumped across to financial crime as the policy lead for anti-bribery and corruption, and I also then there was a reorganisation, and the role of head of ABC came up as my boss then moved on. So I did that, and I looked after all the policies for financial crime. And during that time, I also did my coaching diploma with the bank, because I think one of the great things about working in a large organisation like HSBC is they really have a focus on leadership and training, and I have done some of the most amazing courses with HSBC and things like the London Business School, but the coaching for me was a real was absolutely fantastic. So I did my coaching practitioner course, and I started to do more of the helping others learn some coaching skills. So I did a little coaching practice whilst as a little side hustle in the bank, and that brought me really to 2020, and here I am, and I'm pivoting, and I've had the opportunity to go into coaching and have my own coaching practice. So it's been an amazing journey.
And it's great you've got this opportunity now to give back, and I think that coaching is a fantastic way of bringing on new talent. One of the things you talked about there was doing a law degree at night while working, and moving across from being a team secretary into a kind of operational role. Both things I think are outstanding and difficult to achieve. And I wondered if you had any advice for your younger self, the younger Sue, as you moved into your compliance career, and what would that be?
Well, I think that was my first for learning was very much an all-consuming thing in the early days. And I think my advice to myself looking back was perhaps maybe a little bit to slow down, but think about not just the technical knowledge, but also the self-development. So read more about, showing up in the right way. Get a mentor, because actually I didn't have a mentor for, it was very much an informal thing for me, but all the large organizations, and actually I would imagine, most good organizations these days will have some kind of a mentoring program. I would urge anyone to really take advantage of that, because I think there's a lot to be gained. Also I think be the person you want others, to want to work with, because I think sometimes, especially in this kind of career, it can be quite self-absorbing, and it's quite an inner world, and actually where I had the most enjoyment was when I started working in teams and looking at how we leverage the working together and the collaboration. I think also in moving through my career, look for the people who are going to be role models, and not just look for the roles, because some of the best jobs I've done have been with really inspirational leaders. And in fact, actually always the jobs that I've enjoyed the most are because the people I'm working with have been an absolute inspiration to me. And I think as a final thing, don't forget the hobbies, because, working in financial services, I think working in law, it can be all consuming. And sometimes we lose a little bit of balance. I think people have felt that in the pandemic, longer hours, lots of time on Zoom, but get out there and bring the inner child out to play, because that's where the creativity comes from. And, and creativity is where innovation springs from, and we need that. So hobbies. And I think my ambition for this year in that vein is to learn to play the piano. Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I don't know, but, start small, because I never learned any musical instruments as a child. Doing things that are creative, I think, are really important.
Well, I wish you well with learning the piano. I am a terrible pianist, up there with the world's worst, but getting to be a better trumpet player, and that's been my hobby, and it's been a lot of fun exploring that through the pandemic, and I hope that I'll be able to get back out there and play in groups when this is all through. I know you'll get a lot out of playing the piano. So good luck. Moving on to kind of the substance of financial crime, you've had this fantastic career. You've got insight into so many areas, and I wondered if you had to pick, say, 3 financial crime trends, what they would be.
So I think what I would probably start with is, there's going to be a lot more, but there has already been a lot of work on technology and how to use technology more effectively. But I think I would couple that with, we really need to get to do more data sharing and sharing of knowledge, because for me, I think, financial institutions have put a lot of investment into this now, but I don't think, I would be very sad to see if, fighting financial crime was something that gave you a competitive edge, because I don't think that fighting financial crime is a competition. So to me, I think if we can get to a space where these, financial services organisations are working together, and we get over the hurdles of data sharing and competition law and all these things, that I think would really be a step change. Because, for example, why do we have, multiple risk assessment? Why does every bank have its own risk assessment model for financial crime? I mean, what we're looking at here is the same things. The more consistent we are in the way we approach this, the harder it is, in my view, for financial criminals to come in and arbitrage the processes. So I think that would be, I think, an area of exploration. And in any event, I know that they're all looking at technology and digital and machine learning. So lots of work in that space. I think on the back of that, to me, I think compliance functions are already integrating more across money laundering, sanctions, bribery, fraud, because we're looking at the same data with different lenses. So I think, from a business perspective and supporting growth, we need to be looking at how we face off to the business with one voice. So I think more integration of compliance and less silos of specialities is probably an area to explore. And I think that was something that Sarah Pritchard mentioned in her interview with you, is this work that they've been doing across fraud, cybercrime and money laundering with experts in that area. So that was very heartening. And I think that's a real, it's a challenge, but I think we'd see some exciting developments there going forward. So those would be my top three.
Well, thank you. And that was, for those who aren't familiar with Sarah Pritchard, she's director of the National Economic Crime Centre, and her episode is also available through the Centre for Legal Leadership website. And then finally, Sue, I just wondered if we could turn to the future of financial crime risk in the 2020s, perhaps having particular regard to the impact of COVID-19. So business is changing, a lot of things are in flux. You've been at the centre of this financial crime world for a long time in a very senior role. What are your thoughts on dealing with financial crime risk in the 2020s?
So I think it's a bit of a wish list rather than what might happen. I don't really know, but I think what we more policy and regulation. I'm sure there's going to be more prosecutions, but I feel that's not necessarily going to solve the problem, because I think we need to look back and understand a little bit more about the source of this. So I would really like to see some more challenge and consideration for what's possible in really solving corruption. I think there is a little bit of an us and them, developed versus developing, or however we want to put it. But what we know is financial crime is coming from the developed world, and we need to look at how we can work with communities to see how we can solve that. And I think, in fact, I think Fidelis Omoswapo put it really well in that he said we need to go and understand the context for the source of financial crime, the source of corruption, and understand what's going on for people. I think the other thing for me, actually, as part of my coaching, every single person I coach people in risk management. That is my niche, and without fail, when we start out and we talk about purpose and what they want to do, they want to make a difference in the world. And so I think the answer to some of these big questions like climate change and corruption and human trafficking, I don't think that's going to come necessarily from the top. I think we need to spread the net a bit wider. And I think within compliance, there's a real role to play there in ESG and climate change. And I was really, really heartened to see the announcement last week that Noel Quinn will be chairing the Financial Services Task Force for the Sustainable Markets Initiative under Prince Charles. I think that's, looking at climate change across the financial services industry and actually saying how can we get to net zero and look at what's possible. That's a really exciting area. And I know a lot of people in risk management, because they want to make a difference, I think they're going to be interested in that. So how do we bring compliance in that at the outset? Because to me, this is an ecosystem that we work within in financial services. We need to look at customer, we need to look at third parties, we need to look at our employee risk, but we need to look at that in the context of the products and services that we provide to the communities that we serve. And could we do this a little bit more effectively by seeing it as something, from an ecosystem point of view? I know those are grand words and I don't have all the answers, but I feel like there is something that financial services can do to really contribute. because I think also, taking on board Fidela's comment that there is a lack of trust in government at the moment, but people are now turning more to corporates for trust. They can see what they're doing, and there's a real sense there that we could actually make a difference. But do we really understand the purpose of these corporates? And I'd like to see more about how in financial services we are serving the communities as opposed to just making money. It's maybe that's a bit of a wish list and a half, but I think that there is a real possibility there if we look above the parapet and look outward.
Look, that's fascinating. And you mentioned Fidelis a couple of times there. His interview is also on the CLL website for people who want to pick that up. It's true, I think, that ESG is becoming so much more important to financial crime lawyers, and that interface, which we're still kind of working through, I think, to be honest, is going to be a real trend for the 2020s. So thank you for flagging it. And also the corporate responsibility point. It's probably worth reflecting that the Bribery Act came in almost immediately after the last financial crash, and that's no coincidence. And so we can expect legislative change to come along as we try and work out what we want of our companies and banks in the 2020s post-COVID-19. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise and your answers. And although you said you didn't have all the answers, you have many, many very interesting answers that I'm delighted you chose to share through the Financial CrimeCast. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure.